John chapter 1, starting with verse 35. The next day, John was there again with two of his disciples. When he saw Jesus passing by, he said, "Look, the Lamb of God." When the two disciples heard him say this, they followed Jesus. Turning around, Jesus saw them following, and he asked, "What do you want?" They said, "Rabbi," which means teacher, "where are you staying?" "Come with me," he replied, "and you will see." So they went and saw where he was staying and spent that day with him. It was about the 10th hour. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the two who had heard what John had said and who had followed Jesus. The first thing Andrew did was to find his brother. He found his brother Simon to tell him, "We have found the Messiah." That is the Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. I can't think of any more productive statement in the world than he found his brother and brought him to Jesus. Now, we are entering into the holiday season. It's when family is really on our mind. We're thinking about those that we wish we could spend time with, looking forward to the ones we are going to spend time with, regretting the ones that we will be spending time with. It's a family time. And I wanted to present something to you that maybe you've never heard before, something that talks about family, something that talks about relationships, something that speaks to our church. And so we're going to take a moment to look at relationships of family members in the gospel. Now, we already saw Andrew was the brother to Peter. We know that James and John were brothers. We know that it talks about their fathers. They were the sons of Zebedee. It talks about family relationships. And so each person who came to Christ had some kind of an impact on the people around them. Either the families embraced it or the families rejected it. But I'm going to talk about a relational thing that happened with the church over the last 2,000 years that is a real sad event. I want to talk about a relationship that was obscured over the ages. This story involves theology, it involves history, it involves councils that met. It involves a misleading doctrine, the distortion of men in order to protect a heretical ideology. And it's impacted the world for 2,000 years. These heresies work to remove a powerful group of ministers from the historical record and nullify their stories to protect a lie. It's a story about the siblings of Jesus. It's a story of the true reality of Mary's experience as a mother. A distortion of her life as a woman who faced life like any other mother would. All in an attempt to elevate her to a divinity that ended up betraying her. We're going to look at the family of Jesus. His mom and dad, his half-siblings, his family life growing up. And we can begin with Mark chapter 6, verses 1 through 3. It says, Jesus left there and went to his hometown, accompanied by his disciples. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were amazed. Where did this man get his knowledge? They asked. What's this wisdom that has been given to him, that he even does miracles. Now watch this. Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son, the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us as well? Speaking about the local community, the sisters would have married within the community more than likely. So the sisters were there too. If you count it up, Jesus had 4 brothers and at least 2 sisters. That makes how many children? How many? 7, and then mom and dad, there's 9. So this is a family of at least 9. It doesn't say how many sisters. We just know there was more than one. What was it like growing up as a half-sibling to Jesus? Now, Jesus would have been the oldest. So he would have been responsible for the family if the dad passes away. Think about growing up. Mary would have been spending time with the girls. What would she have been teaching them? How to make clothes, how to make food, how to care for the home. The boys would have been with Joseph, learning the trade, learning the Torah, learning what life as a man would look like. The boys would have gone through their bar mitzvah, or the time where they were set aside to be men. They did life together. They learned together. Look at Luke chapter 8, verse 19. Jesus was teaching, and it says, now Jesus, his mother and brothers came to see him. Jesus' mother and brothers came to see him, but they were not able to get inside because of the crowd. So someone ran and told Jesus, your mother and brothers are standing outside wanting to see you. There's somebody from the family missing. The girls, so they were probably off taking care of other issues, but the men of the house were there, but somebody was missing. Joseph. Which indicates that he was probably dead at this time. Which, if you look further, you find that Jesus would have been the head of the household. He would have been responsible for everything once the dad passes away. So why would Jesus' mom and brothers come to seek him out? There was probably an issue at home. They needed his input, or they needed his direction for something. It doesn't take a genius to figure out. The mom and the brothers come to him. He's responsible for the household. Why would they come to him? Why wouldn't they just come and be a part of the congregation? No, they came specifically for him. They had a need. Someone once suggested maybe the need was his dad was dying. We don't know. And we could speculate 1,000 things, and we could write novels about what it could be. But the fact that they came for Jesus indicates that it was something to do with family. Almost like the whole world looks to you right now. And your own family needs you. One of the struggles a pastor has, with all the needs and demands that can come, and yet you still have a family at home that has specific needs as well. And balancing that out can become really difficult at times. It could have also been that they were exasperated with him doing this. He was responsible for the family business, carpentry, responsible for the things that were happening at the house. And here he was off with the boys teaching people. Almost a sense from the brothers that he was neglecting his responsibility at home to go become an itinerant preacher. When Jesus went to full-time ministry, when he was no longer responsible for the home, that responsibility of caring for the home and the issues of the home would have fallen on probably James. We're not sure of the order, but by the way it's laid out, it seems that James was the next in line. So James would have taken over the responsibility of the family. Everybody had grown up. The sisters were probably married. And you can see this tension between Jesus and his family members. John chapter 7, starting with verse 1. After this, Jesus went around to Galilee, purposely staying away from Judea because the Jews were there waiting to take his life. But when the Jewish feast of the tabernacles was near, Jesus' brothers said to him, his brothers, Adelphoi, his brothers said to him, "You ought to leave here and go to Judea so that your disciples may see the miracles you do. No one who wants to become a public figure acts in secret. Since you're doing these things, show yourself to the world." For even his own brothers did not believe in him. You sense this tension in the home. And we miss it. We miss that this was happening and that Jesus was transitioning from being the leader of the home to becoming the Savior of the world. All of this changed after the resurrection. Then Jesus' brothers began to follow him. Now I'm going to point out really quickly that there are some who have said, well, when it refers to these as brothers, it's referring to them as cousins or stepbrothers. They weren't actually really his brothers. There's nothing to indicate that they were anything other than half siblings. The word adelphos, plural adelphoi, literally means the child of at least one shared biological parent. So obviously, Jesus was not the son of Joseph. He was miraculously conceived. But they were all sons of Mary. Jesus and Paul refer to spiritual brothers, mothers and sisters at time. But they point it out. It's clearly stated that they're talking from a spiritual perspective. But any time in history that the brothers and sisters of Jesus were mentioned, they were mentioned as biological brothers and sisters. This is really important that you embrace. St. Jerome tried to push this and say, well, it really was a problem that happened with the transition of Hebrew into the Septuagint, which is, the Greek version of the Hebrew. And the word for brother, which could be taken as cousin or stepbrother, was translated incorrectly. And so in the Greek, it's translated as this biological parent having a child. And so it was really a mistranslation of the Hebrew into the Greek. What he didn't take into account was this was written in Greek. John wrote the gospel. Mark wrote the gospel. Matthew wrote his gospel. Luke wrote his gospel in Greek. They didn't translate it from the Hebrew into it. The word they used, adelphos and adelphoi, biological child. This becomes really important. We can see all of these things reiterated in Matthew chapter 13. Matthew 13, verse 54. Coming to his hometown, he began teaching the people in their synagogues. They were amazed. Where did this man get his wisdom and the miraculous power? Isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't this Mary's son? And aren't these brothers, James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas? Aren't they all? And aren't his sisters here with us also? Now, I'm going to give you something. Judas the brother of Jesus, was not Judas Iscariot, Judas the son of Iscariot. Because there was a problem with it, they changed Judas's name to Jude. He wrote the epistle of Jude in the New Testament. So there we have one of Jesus' brothers, biological brothers, writing a very short letter called Jude. His brother James became the leader of the church in Jerusalem. He also wrote one of the epistles. It's called James, and we read that. Jesus' brother. See, the Gospels declare their existence as biological brothers. The book of Acts declares the leadership roles they take. The epistles or the letters declare their authority. Historians like Josephus unequivocally call James the brother of Jesus. Historians told of the martyrdom of James and Jude, each claiming that they were the brothers of Jesus. Mark called them siblings of Jesus. Mark chapter 3, verse 31. Then Jesus' mother and brothers arrived, standing outside. They sent someone in to call him. The crowd was sitting around, and they told him, "Your mother and brothers are outside looking for you." Jesus said, "Who are my mother and my brothers?" Then he looked at those seated in a circle around him and said, "Here are my mother, my brothers." Again, speaking spiritually. Whoever does God's will is my brother and my sister and my mother. See how he specifies that he's talking spiritually. Do you know that Paul called James the brother of Jesus? Galatians chapter 1, verse 18. Then after 3 years, I went to Jerusalem to get acquainted with Peter and stayed with him 15 days. I saw none of the other apostles, only James, the Lord's brother. Do you know that Paul designates two specific ministry groups in 1 Corinthians chapter 9? 1 Corinthians 9, starting with verse 4. Don't we have the right to food and drink? Don't we have the right to take a believing wife along with us, as do the other apostles? There's the first group. And the Lord's brothers. There's the second group. There are two ministry groups, the apostles and then the Lord's brothers. The Lord's brothers became a ministry group in the area. Jesus' brothers were clearly influential in the church and in church history. Mary was the mother of the greatest world changers in history. Not only did she give birth to the Messiah, but her other boy she gave birth to ended up going out and changing the world. This became a problem. With the rise of the ascetics and the monastics. An ascetic was a person who dedicated their life to the pursuit of spiritual ideals and perfection with extreme self-denial and self-discipline. They said that holiness in us was to abstain from anything that could possibly be depicted as sinful and evil. One of those things was sex in marriage. No righteous person would have any kind of sexual pleasure or sexual involvement, even in marriage. And they began to teach that it was full impurity. Well, that created a problem. Because Mary would have had to have had sexual relations at least 7 times. Well, 6 times, I'm sorry, because the first time. So 6 times, at least. Well, we can't have that. Mary was pure. How do we deify Mary? How do we talk about how wonderful Mary is while still pointing out that she had sexual encounters? So they put forth this thing that's called perpetual virginity. Mary married Joseph, but never had sexual encounter with him. Jesus was born miraculously, and she remained untouched by Joseph until the day she died. So these siblings that are mentioned must have been Joseph's children from another marriage. And so Joseph from another marriage brings his kids in. Mary now becomes their mother as well in this relationship, but not her biological children. And so this wonderful story about perpetual virginity put on Mary began to obscure her family. Ladies, you know, what did it obscure? Her motherhood. What her responsibilities for taking care of her children, her birthing process, the struggles back then of every birth was a risking of your life. The daily worries of taking care of your children, daily worries for children that might be going astray, possibly dying with the or living with the passing of a dying husband. And how am I going to take care of my family? How am I going to take care of my kids? You see, the perpetual virginity takes all that out. Makes it that Mary wasn't a real mother. Yeah, she did have people she took care of, but she didn't really have the responsibilities. The accomplishments of Mary raising her kids is nullified. The accomplishments of her children are obscured. Moms, how would you like to have that happen to you? All in the process of somebody trying to deify you. Everything was done to protect their doctrine. The ministry of the siblings for the church was obscured through history. Even though the gospel writers, the Apostle Paul, and historians clearly claimed literally they were the children of Mary. Never underestimate the power of religious people to twist the scriptures in order to make their own point and to turn it into something that becomes doctrine. If you look close enough in the scriptures and in history, you can find the family story as it was lived out in the world. Mary was a normal woman, a normal wife, a normal mom. She experienced love, birth, parenting, and suffering. She experienced laughter and family moments. She experienced life in a small community. She experienced the ridicule of people who saying that she gave birth to a child out of wedlock. She experienced loss, pain, and grief. She wasn't deity. She was chosen to be the mom of Jesus, the Messiah. Just like she was chosen to give birth to her other children. Josephus told of the martyrdom of the brothers of Jesus. I'm going to talk about two of them. Josephus was a historian at the time. He was writing to Romans. He had no reason to try to candy coat anything about Jesus or his followers. But Josephus wrote about the crucifixion of Christ. To my knowledge, he was never a believer. Some say he was. But James, at this point, was called James the Just. He was the one who headed up the council of Jerusalem whenever there was an issue. He was the one who brought peace and clarity to it. Josephus said that this brother to Jesus, son of Mary, was told by the religious people to retract what he was saying about salvation in his brother Jesus. And they came to him and they flattered him, saying, "You're a just man. You know that what is happening right now is causing turmoil. In your just response, would you please tell people to calm it down? And would you please just say that this stuff wasn't important? That they didn't need to focus on it and that it's not even real. Would you do this, oh just one? Look at what it's doing to the people around. Look at how it's hurting our community. So being the just man that you are, would you please come and bring peace to this that has caused such conflict?" So he went up onto the temple and they wanted him to cry out to all the people that Jesus wasn't important, Jesus wasn't the Messiah. And this whole thing about salvation, the story that was being shared, was a lie. He got up there and he proclaimed that there was salvation in no one else but Jesus. Could you imagine bragging about your brother that way? Let me tell you about my brother. He's the Messiah and he's the only way to salvation. And so they threw him off the building. Tradition says that he didn't die immediately, so they began to stone him. After beating him and torturing him, another man came up with a club and beat him to death. This, the brother of Jesus, the son of Mary, becomes obscured to our concept of ministry and history. Wasn't important to share, because to share it would be in conflict with the doctrine of perpetual virginity. There was another one of Mary's sons. One was crucified, one was horribly beaten, just as we said about James. The other one was Jude. He was hacked to death with an axe. These brothers of Jesus who didn't initially believe. It says even his own brothers weren't believing. Well, after the resurrection, they ended up becoming incredibly powerful ministers. Not only did they now believe that their brother was the Messiah, they were willing to die for it, horrible deaths. They died for the message of salvation in no one else but Jesus. Mary eventually died as well, because it's kind of the course of human people. Now let's go back to the very beginning where I started, about Andrew going and finding his brother Peter. You know, Andrew was always bringing one person. As a matter of fact, he's known as the one who brought others. He brought Peter to the Lord. He was also the one that found the boy with the loaves and fish and brought them to Jesus so he could feed the 5,000. He's always bringing just one person. Kind of insignificant compared to Peter giving the first sermon and 3,000 people commit their lives to Christ in one day. And the amount of people that Peter brought to Jesus. What Andrew did was not even a comparison. He just brought one at a time. But he brought Peter. We get all of these things caught up thinking that there are different levels of importance. We talk about Billy Graham as being so great. Well, who brought Billy Graham? You know, you get where I'm going with this. Andrew brought Peter. always bringing someone. You know that when Andrew was martyred, they hung him on a cross. And he said he didn't deserve to die on the same kind of cross that Christ did. So they made an X and they strung him out on this X. It's now called St. Andrew's Cross, if you see that X. Because that's how Andrew was killed, after being tortured, put on that cross. His brother, Peter, was crucified upside down because he didn't want to die the same way Jesus did. He didn't feel that he deserved to die like Jesus, so they hung him upside down. These brothers that loved each other so much, they pointed each other towards Christ. And they gave their lives for the message of Jesus. John, who wrote the Gospel of John, he wrote the epistles, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. He wrote Revelation. He didn't write those until after his brother, James the Great. Not James the brother of Jesus, but James the brother of John. Remember James and John, the sons of thunder, these guys. James was the first apostle that had been martyred. Now, we know that Stephen was the first one martyred, but he wasn't one of the apostles. He was one of the deacons. The first apostle martyred was James, John's brother. Tradition says that he was run through with a sword and then beheaded. Tortured and then beheaded. These siblings, these brothers, these family relationships that saw this relationship with Christ, something so important that it was worth dying for. And tradition takes the relationships and makes them insignificant to other doctrines that are developed. These were brothers who stood together, died for the sake of Christ. The message was so important that they couldn't keep quiet about it, and they certainly wouldn't reject it. And all of these lives, connected with families, connected with dads, connected with other siblings, being lived out, witnessed, historically proven outside the scriptures. Families living together, following Christ, and encouraging each other to stay strong, even if it meant death. All of the historical accounts. And if we're not careful, we miss it. That's why looking at relationships in the book of John is so important. How did each other encourage one another? What did they face? In how many ways has the historical record brought these people into obscurity? Because their lives, their families, their relationships just weren't that important. My prayer for us as we go into this holiday season is that we begin to look at the relationships in the Bible and how it relates to us. My prayer for us is that we read the stories and we enter into their stories and we try to put ourselves in their position. What was it like? What did they see? What did they feel? How did they interact? How does that impact my life? What does it mean to me? And I pray that in the process of it, the greatest relationship of all is strengthened. And that's your relationship with the Son of the living God, who lived, who died, who was buried, who rose again, and he's coming back. May we never let the story of Christ become obscure, even in the slightest way. May we learn to be faithful to the end.